do I have your attention? First example, the simplest kind of timing machine there is a single state represented by a circle with a timeout arrow, which is an arrow with an open arrowhead and some unit of time, I don't know, let's say 3 seconds associated with the timeout arrow, and a signal. And the signal could be any kind of symbol, I don't know, X. And what this diagram represents is what in electrical engineering would be called a pulse generator. That is to say, every 3 seconds this state times out, in this case to itself, and when it times out it emits a signal X. So we could give a name to this state, we'll call it state A. A, together with the timeout arrow with 3 seconds on it and the signal arrow labeled X, constitutes what would be called a basic oscillator. Okay, suppose A is the state of a basic oscillator with a period of 3, and the signal from A goes to a state B, which has a trigger arrow, which is an arrow with a closed head, to a state C. And suppose that state C times out back to B after 2 seconds. And when it times out, suppose it emits a signal Y. What's the behavior of this compound timing machine, which has 2 parts, the basic oscillator and this sort of one-shot element over here? Well, let's see what happens. After 3 seconds, A times out, sends a signal X to B. B gets triggered to C. A has already started another 3-second timeout, and after 2 seconds of that second 3-second timeout of A, C gets back to B, and so by the time A times out a second time, we're in state B here, and so you get a trigger up to C again, and C starts another timeout. So this period is longer than this timeout, and so pretty much every time you time out for A, you'll get a signal Y over from C. So this is slow, this is fast. So this would be what you might call a low-pass filter, because this is slow enough for this thing to replicate in Y the signals X coming from the timeout of the basic oscillator. So we'll call this a low-pass filter. And now you can imagine, suppose instead of 3 here, it was like 1/10 of a second. So pretty quickly, after 1/10 of a second, you'd get triggered up from B to C, but a whole bunch of signals from A would pass from A to B, while C is still timing out back to B. So most of those would be missed. In other words, if A were very high frequency, you wouldn't get much of an output. And this combination of behavior where a long period here lets a signal go all the way through, but a short period here blocks a signal, that combination is definitely a low-pass filter. And I want to point out that even if this was a random delay here with some kind of average timeout, like a Poisson process with a parameter lambda, if lambda gave rise to a long average rate at which signals go, then you would have random outputs, Y corresponding to random inputs X. But if lambda were very small, so that the average wait time was very short, then of course it would be blocked. And so this is a robust low-pass filter.